everyone, welcome back to Be More, where we inspire you to be more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond. For today's session, we are exploring what it takes to be more open source commons. And my guest today is Michael. So, Michael, are you able to introduce yourself for us, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Michael Kolodner. I'm an independent consultant based outside of Philadelphia in the United States. And I have been involved in the open source commons, well, since before it was called the open source commons, really.
Wow.
Originally, there were these events called open source sprints or nonprofit success pack community sprints. I don't even know what their official name was originally, but I got involved in 2015, I think it was. There was a sprint in Baltimore, and Judy Sohn, who at the time organized those, invited me to come and lead a team looking into how NPSP addresses worked, which was strange to me because I had no idea how they worked. I had been asking a lot of questions, which was why Judy invited
Mm,
me. And so we sat down at the sprint, which I'll explain what sprints are, but let me finish this. We sat down and for 2 days we sort of poked at the feature and tried to figure out everything we could about how it worked, and then wrote up some community sourced documentation. And that was my introduction to the not just the open source sprint community, but really it was my introduction to Salesforce events. It was my first
mhm.
real event in person with Salesforce people.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's great to have you here. And I think it kind of talks to the power of the Salesforce community in general because we've both been connected by Emma Keeling today, who unfortunately can't make it because of a bereavement, but she was great enough to put us together and kind of connect us and kind of suggested to me, oh, hey, why don't you talk about the open source commons? Maybe Michael's a good candidate for this. So unfortunately, she can't be here today, but the power of this program has connected two complete strangers from across the world, right?
It really has. So let me try to give a little intro to sort of
Yeah.
what the program is. I know that Emma got involved during the lockdown portion of the pandemic, so she had a very different entry to this than I did, coming from in-person events starting in 2015. But the sprints are, or I should say were, these
Mhm.
2-day events in person, a couple of times a year, nonprofit practitioners, so that could be consultants, it could be users from nonprofits, or it could be salesforce.org employees. We would get together, we would think about what did and didn't work on the platform for nonprofits using Salesforce, and then think about, well, okay, if these are the problems we see, what can we do to solve them? In the early days, that was what could we do over the course of 2 days as a group to try to come up with something, whether that was write documentation or make a
Mhm.
little app or build a entity relationship diagram that people could use as a cookbook, things like that. Over time, and really primarily, like, probably in 2019, right before the pandemic, Corey O'Brien, who at that point was running the program for Salesforce.org, she realized that there were a lot of sprint projects that didn't necessarily go anywhere,
Mm.
or there were sprint projects that kept happening sprint after sprint, but there was a lot of sort of reimagining, reinventing the wheel each time. And then the third category were projects that really had a life of their own. For example, the outbound funds module, which is a
Mhm.
free add-on to the nonprofit success pack, that began life as a sprint project where people said we really need a way to help our organizations do granting, and let's build a architecture. And salesforce.org eventually published that as a managed package, but then they also made their own version that had more paid version. So the managed package, Corey, in the process of figuring out how this was going to go, she
Mm.
came up with this structure, open source commons, which was that a project to be part of the open source commons that might eventually publish an app, for example,
Yeah.
through Salesforce Labs, they had to have an ongoing structure, of meetings and leaders and and documentation. So the sprints were sort of shifting to have these organized ongoing projects, which was really helpful because then when the sprint that was scheduled for, I want to say, March in Atlanta in 2020 got
Mm.
canceled, Corey was able to say, okay, we're going to pivot to virtual sprints. We're going to take the open source commons virtual, and we have this structure of projects that have a life of their own and continue. And so these projects could continue to exist. Sprints could continue to happen in a virtual world. And, way more people could get involved and could travel to one city,
Mm.
which was great. So we
Yeah.
started having sprints with, 100, 150, 200 people in the virtual world. And it's this amazing feeling to get together with all these people who work with or for nonprofits and think about how we use the Salesforce platform in ways that are common, in ways that are not common to each other, and then what can we do together to build, write, design, whatever, something that will be useful to people in all these different ways that everyone uses the platform. So it's it's a very special gathering of people where we're
Yeah.
all nonprofit folk, we're all working for or with organizations whose goal is to make the world a better place. And we're using this common technology, the Salesforce platform, so we can come together and have a common language and common challenges and work together towards that common solution.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great, and that's really interesting to me. That like the background of some things, like I didn't realize that OFM started out that way. So
Yeah.
definitely somebody who's kind of newer to the nonprofit world, and I'm kind of learning right now nonprofit cloud rather than NPSP. So it's all new, it's all fresh, and it's great to have this context. So have you ever worked on any sprints in particular with the amazing Emma then? Is that how you know each other, or
So I met Emma because, all right, so now I have to back up.
yeah.
So I met Emma briefly on a virtual sprint. I can't remember actually for sure if we were working on the same project or if we just ended up having some side discussion.
Mm.
I really don't remember when we first met, but we ultimately, all right, now I have to go into a backstory. So
Yeah.
there is a character associated with the sprints. The open
Mm.
source commons has an official community mascot, official in the sense that the community has officially adopted it, not official in the sense that Salesforce has, published,
Plushies, yeah.
beautiful drawings or made a character costume. So Sprinty is
Mm.
a T-Rex who shows up at sprints, and he originally started I believe it was actually at an education summit event in like 2014 or 15. He started coming to sprints because he represented the idea that sprints were so welcoming and inclusive that even a T-Rex could contribute.
Yeah.
So it became a tradition that Sprinty would show up at all the sprints. I will neither confirm nor deny rumors that I have helped Sprinty show up to various sprints. But when there was going to be the first sprint in London, Corey O'Brien was looking for someone who could help facilitate Sprinty's arrival there. And I was put in touch with Emma to coordinate how Sprinty would appear and what Sprinty does at the events. And we became fast friends. And I guess we got to meet in person for the first time last October 31st or November 1st when we had an in-person sprint in Chicago,
Mm.
and we've been hanging out ever since.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's great. And I've definitely seen Sprinty out and about in the community. I think it's amazing. And again, the context is everything, right? So it's kind of a welcoming um area really for anybody in the community, even if you are a T-Rex, come along and you can still help, right? Oh, there you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, for those of your people who are watching this on YouTube, I figured we should show Sprinty. So I got to get out of the way.
Yeah.
There's Sprinty.
Not quite to scale, but yeah.
Not quite to scale. That's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we mentioned some amazing people in the ecosystem already. What other people do you kind of interact with as part of the sprints, and perhaps what background or what role do they play in their actual kind of jobs outside of the open source community?
That's a great, yeah. So sprints draw all kinds of people,
Mm,
from beginners to people who've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for years. For I think reasons that are fairly obvious, attendance skews towards consultants who
yeah,
work with nonprofits. There's always a good representation of Salesforce employees who are interested in what this sprint is,
yeah,
and then there are users from nonprofits. That's where we tend to get any sort of beginners, real beginners who are new to the platform. It's a tough environment for someone who has not really used Salesforce at all, although there are ways that person could contribute. That's unlikely that person would hear about the sprint in the first place.
hmm,
So
yeah,
that's okay. But an organization, I mean, like I said, when I first went to my first sprint in 2015 in Baltimore, I'd been a user for maybe 3 years, and I had just gotten my first full-time Salesforce job. I had been dabbling as an admin in that first, user role. Um, and I was able to contribute because the project that I ended up sort of facilitating was, let's poke at how this thing works. So from the perspective of users, and then document that, which obviously
yeah,
I could help. Um, but other projects I've haven't necessarily been involved in, but I've watched some really good facilitation. For example, there was a project is a project that's talking about better ways to do membership on the platform.
hmm,
NPSP's membership functionality is fairly basic. A lot of consultants are constantly saying, "Oh, I just have to rebuild this whole custom architecture
yeah,
each time." So there's a project about membership, and I've seen that they sort of solicited, okay, if your organization does membership, come talk to us. We
mm,
want to hear how you do membership, even if you don't do it at all on Salesforce. Come talk to us so that we can understand what the parameters are, what the world of memberships is like.
hmm,
Um, and then they went, started working on like developing a schema, whatever. So then you need people who have some understanding of the platform and can diagram it out and think through the possibilities and what will scale and things like that. But there really is room at all levels for all kinds of nonprofit users. And I will even say, to some extent, if you are a Salesforce admin or architect or whatever, and you don't have much experience in the nonprofit world, there are still ways you could contribute to
yeah,
sprints. You just have to be open to the understanding that there are parts of the nonprofit vertical. I hate that word, but I'm not coming up with a better one right
yeah,
now. The nonprofit uh, economy that are maybe different from what you're used to in whatever part of the world you work
mm,
in. But if you understand the architecture of Salesforce, you can help us build solutions that will be helpful to nonprofits.
yeah, definitely. And how do you think this is changing, like, if at all, with non-profit cloud versus NPSP? Like, is the role of this source commons changing, evolving to kind of keep up, do you think?
So I mean, the first and most honest answer is I
Yeah.
don't know. So I will
Okay.
say,
Yeah.
as you probably know, as some of your listeners probably know, there were a couple rounds of layoffs at
Mm.
Salesforce.org or the nonprofit side of Salesforce, whatever it
Hmm.
is the right thing to call it now, since the Salesforce.org was reabsorbed into the mothership and
Yeah.
etc. There have been a couple of rounds of layoffs. I am frankly surprised, but very much pleased that the open source commons and the sprints have continued. Will
Yeah.
they, will they into the future? Who can say? But so
Yeah.
far, they are continuing, and that's great. I think they're I think they bring a lot of value to Salesforce. They help nonprofits use Salesforce. I think
Mm.
they're a great thing for the company, but executives make decisions that I can't necessarily uh, agree with.
Yeah.
Anyway, for now, we're thrilled that it continues. Uh, Nothing that has been okay. Sprint projects are generally speaking solution agnostic or
Mhm.
platform, right? They're part of the platform.
Yeah.
They those that have been developed that have become actual packages um, can work with the nonprofit success pack, but I
Mm.
guess I can't say this categorically, but I'm pretty sure none of them specifically require the nonprofit success pack.
Mhm.
That is to say, they may interact with, well, all of them interact with contacts,
Yeah.
but just the fact that you have contacts, it doesn't matter if you're using NPSP or Vanilla Sales Cloud, or you
Mhm.
could be using new nonprofit cloud. So I think if there's any projects I'm not thinking of that specifically require NPSP, I'm sure in the future that will get generalized somewhat, but I don't think there are
Yeah.
anyway. And similarly, I would say I'm fairly confident that future projects will not assume the existence of nonprofit cloud or education cloud in
Mhm.
your instance, because that would be limiting. And there are going to be organizations that aren't on nonprofit cloud or don't
Yeah.
want to be on nonprofit cloud because their use case doesn't need it, but they might want to use whatever other project has been developed. I'll give an example.
Mm.
One of the current projects that is now like GA with their product is called the Grassroots Mobile Survey app.
Okay. Yeah.
Grassroots Mobile Survey is an app that allows you to create surveys that would be taken on a mobile device offline. So you don't have to have a connection live at the time you're taking the survey. It's for allowed field workers to download their surveys for
Yeah.
their case load, go out into rural areas, take the information, and then when they get back, they can upload all of the results. That is completely platform agnostic. It works with I don't remember exactly how you set it up. It's a while since I played with it, but you can set up surveys that are child to contact or child to some custom object of yours
Mhm.
or whatever. So you could presumably do it with nonprofit cloud if you wanted to, or education cloud, or any health cloud, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the kind of thing where the solution that is developed would not require any particular other solution, free or paid, from
Mm.
Salesforce.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I think that's useful and helps put it into context for anybody that's listening. So thanks for that. And
Yeah,
are there any other projects that you kind of wanted to shout out that over your time being involved, you've been kind of proud to support and kind of help see the light of day, as it were?
absolutely. So I wanna highlight. I'll highlight three if I
Mm.
can. I'll be
Yeah.
really so the first one, which was the first project that I was involved in that was officially part of the open source commons program when Corey regularized it, like I
Hmm.
explained a
Yeah.
few minutes ago, was called Ombudsman Cloud Care. The story of that is that at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all looking for, what we were going to do, ways we could help, etc. I got connected through a friend with a woman named Mary Crozier, who I didn't realize this at the time, but it turned out her husband was the captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which was the US naval aircraft carrier that had an outbreak of COVID very early in the pandemic,
Wow.
like shut the ship down because we didn't know we didn't know how
Hmm.
much it would spread, et cetera, et cetera. So naval ombudsmen are volunteers. Mary, as the captain's wife, worked with the ombudsman, and they were being sort of overwhelmed with the case management load. Before
Mm.
even it broke out on the ship, they were just overwhelmed with, what does it mean for my family that COVID is spreading and schools are shutting down, et cetera. And Mary, who was working in Salesforce at the time, learning, the platform, realized there could be a much better way to track these cases for ombudsmen.
Yeah.
And so we got connected and we worked on putting together essentially we built a bit of an app, but mostly it was a cookbook for how ombudsman groups could get a Salesforce instance, install the app, and track their sailors and families and caseload.
Hmm.
Was very proud of that app. Unfortunately, the US Navy, is it bureaucracy? One part of the bureaucracy decided they didn't know what this Salesforce thing was, and so they were going to shut it down instead of embracing it.
Embrace it.
And
Yeah.
so it's a little bit on ice at the moment, but it was a great way to see the power of the community to come together, build something that ombudsmen could use to make their lives better, particularly when COVID broke out on ship
Mm.
and the group of ombudsmen we were working with were able to track all of the calls and worried families much more easily than they were doing before when they had access to zero technology.
Yeah.
So the next project I joined the leadership of was the Declarative Lookup Rollup Summary Tool, or Dolores,
Yeah.
or DLRS, which most people have heard
Yeah.
of. So Andrew Fawcett originally wrote DLRS. He has since taken much higher roles within Salesforce, and at some
Yeah.
point he said, "I cannot maintain this thing anymore. There's been a dedicated group of volunteers that have helped me, but I just need help. Can someone take it over?"
Mm.
And the open source commons took it over. And so some of us who were already involved with open source commons and others who were involved with Dolores but not part of the commons came together, took hold of this project, which now has had a life of its own for decades,
Mm.
and it's now an open source commons project. The app is published by Salesforce Labs through open source commons. We, meet regularly, put out new releases. In fact, there'll be one coming in a month or two that's going to have a completely redesigned Lightning Web Component for
Oh,
building
nice.
your DLRS rollups, which is going to be amazing. So I'm really proud to be part of that team
Mm.
because I had been using DLRS for years, this amazing free gift that Andrew
Yeah.
Fawcett gave to the community. So as soon as I heard that Open Source Commons was thinking about taking it on, I
Adopting it.
raised my
Yeah.
hand and said, I want to pay it back."
Yeah.
So I'm very proud of that being part of DLRS. And then, so if you've ever used DLRS, if you've ever needed to roll up records that are not in a master detail relationship, DLRS is a great free and powerful tool for that. And so now
Mhm.
you know that you're using something that's now part of the open source commons.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on that one, like the good thing about DLRS is that most people have heard about it, right? I certainly use it on a couple of the projects that I'm on right now, and it has a great community behind it. Like as a forum ambassador for Salesforce on the Trailblazer community, I see what goes on in that group and how active people are and how willing people
Exactly.
are to help, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's just a wonderful thing. And it being part of open source commons, the point of open source commons is to give an organizational structure that will
Mm,
ensure it can always continue and grow
flourish. Yeah.
and get better. So which is great. And
Awesome.
then the last project I want to mention is called Sprinty's Community Resources. I refer to it as Sprinty's List. So Sprinty's Community Resources, you can Google it and you will find the community site. It's a website, but it's a run on an Experience Cloud site. Sprinty's Community Resources is an attempt to gather all of those links to Trailblazer community threads or obscure resources or blog posts or whatever that nonprofit practitioners need, and then make them searchable and findable.
Mm.
Because there have been countless discussions about how best to do soft credits in nonprofit
Yeah.
success. there's
Yeah.
no one right answer, but there are probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 good threads on the topic and
Hmm.
blog posts and the like. So Sprinty's community list is a place to submit those resources and find those if you're looking for them, where you can, more quickly narrow down to the resources that have been vetted, curated, and are the ones we all turn to regularly. So I highly recommend Sprinty's community resources. I hope we can put it in the show notes,
Yep.
but it's Sprinty's community resources.my.site.com, all one word. And of
Hmm.
course, Sprinty's has no apostrophe.
Yeah.
And it's a great site. If you're listening to this and you have that resource that you always turn to that is nonprofit specific and is not like Salesforce help docs that are easy enough to find, you can submit your resources on the site using the submit a resource link. Those
Hmm.
will then be curated by a group of volunteers
Yeah.
and added to the site, which is searchable. So I'm
Awesome.
part of the leadership of that group. Jody Nemser Abrahams was the first person who had the idea and has really driven the creation of this site. And I'm really proud to be part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Plus, with my connection and love for
Yeah.
Sprinty, I love that we named it after Sprinty to make that connection to the open source community.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm sure we could definitely kind of spend a lot of time diving into some other apps because there's definitely a few more apps that I know about that are amazing. But unfortunately, we're going to move on now to the next point. So, thinking about this as somebody that's listening, maybe they're interested and they want to get involved. How can people get involved?
Well, there are a couple of options.
Yeah.
So, the best way to get involved in the open source community is, or the open source projects, is to attend a sprint.
Hmm.
Attend now in the post COVID world means more
Yeah.
than one thing. There are virtual sprints and there are in person sprints. In I will always have a particular fondness for the in person sprints
Yeah.
because they are events where, we get together, we get to know each other, we get to hang out, have dinner, stay up late into the night talking, geeking out about Salesforce things. So
Yeah.
I highly, highly recommend you go to an, an in-person sprint. However, there are also virtual sprints. So those are a great way to get started. There is let me back up. If you want to find these events, there is a Trailblazer community group called salesforce.org Commons and Sprint Events.
Hmm.
And in the little sidebar on the right
Yeah.
that has the information, it has the upcoming events. There is a sprint the day after the World Tour New York City, which will be April 26th. That's sold out, so you can't.
Mm.
But that's the next in-person opportunity, but it's sold out, so too late if you haven't already registered. There will be a community sprint in London on the
Yeah.
4th and 5th of June. I don't know whether that's sold out yet, but that's another in-person event for those of you in the UK or in Europe.
Hmm.
There will be a virtual sprint on September 11th and 12th. So opportunity there for plenty of people to join, and then future events. I won't list them all. You can see them in this sidebar there. Highly recommend you just dive in. When you register, you'll be asked if there's any of the existing projects you're interested in working on. You can pick one. You can change your mind later.
Hmm.
If you're a beginner, those of us who are leaders of projects, try to make sure we have plans for activities that will be useful for beginners or people who have been involved, so you can come and just dive right in.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And I'll be sure to pop that link into the show notes as well. So people that are listening or watching this can check that out too and see what's coming up in their area. So in terms of kind of skills attributes, like if you were to try to summarize this as somebody that takes part in the open source commons, what skills or attributes does it help to have or kind of be strong in?
I really do mean it when I say even a T-Rex can contribute.
Yeah.
If as long as they can, wield a computer mouse, which is challenging with the short arms,
Yeah. Yeah.
and speak, which I don't know if T-Rexes could do. Um, but truly, there are ways to contribute. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, right, you are already a Salesforce nerd, so you have the prerequisite skills for showing up.
Yeah.
uh, if you have no understanding of the nonprofit community, that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But all of us have volunteered with some organization. All of us have heard of some
Mm,
organization. So everyone has some understanding there. It's good to have an understanding of nonprofit success pack and or nonprofit cloud, but it is not required, or education cloud or education data architecture.
yeah.
Um, but really, you're coming to the sprint with the desire to contribute, to
Mm,
help the wider community use the platform more effectively, more efficiently. And if you come with that kind of beginner's mindset, you could be the person who comes in and is asked questions so that you, as the beginner, are answering questions in a way that those of us who are too deep in the weeds might not realize
mhm.
we're
Yeah.
answering wrong. You could come, of course, you can bring your coding skills. We're always looking for more, coders.
Yeah.
You could bring your architecture skills. You could bring your admin skills. Those are all great. You could bring your reading skills, or your rather more importantly, your writing skills or your editing skills, because we're often a project involves this thing should exist that is not official Salesforce help docs, but is a community guide to whatever. So we need to write it and edit it and copy edit it and
Mm,
proofread it and publish
yeah.
it. So we need people who can write, we need people who can proofread, we need people who want to test. You know, the next DLRS release is coming out.
Mm.
We'll explain to you how to install the beta version into your Scratch org, and then you need to poke away at it and find what
Break
what.
it. Yeah.
So we need every possible set of skills in the Salesforce ecosystem. Different projects might need different people at different times. But
Mhm.
if you have a project you're interested in, you can find a way to contribute. If you have a skill you're interested in using, you can probably find a project who's interested in taking that set of skills at this time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's great, and ultimately kind of reiterates the message of being open to everybody, like having a space for everybody, and everybody's thoughts, opinions are welcome, right? Because everyone has a different perspective and has something to add.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's there's a lot of room for coming and saying, I want to help, or here's this problem I'm having, and I think it might be general. So let's talk about it, and maybe it becomes the next sprint
Mm,
project.
yeah. Okay. Awesome. So thinking about this as your role now as open source commons, if there's one thing that you'd like to change or make people more aware of about the program, is there anything that kind of comes to mind, do you think?
That's a really tough question. I mean, I would like sprints to happen more. I would like to be able to
Mm.
go to more of them. None of that is really very realistic, right? I mean, Salesforce is only going to, put so much budget towards this. People only
Yeah.
have so much time in their work year to
Mm.
devote. Um, so I think the program is constantly evolving. We we are still trying to figure it out. Major props to Corey O'Brien who runs it. There's bef- well, in the early days of the sprint, about half of one day, or maybe more, was taken up thinking up projects and ideas that might happen.
Mhm.
And the pendulum swung the other way to just working on existing projects more and more. and
Yeah.
now it is we are
Keeping
trying
it
to figure out how to
fair.
move it more to the middle. In the virtual world, it's hard to do that kind of exercise.
Mm.
In the in-person world, you have people who show up and they're like raring to go on their
Yeah,
project,
yeah.
and so they don't necessarily want. So, if I could wave my magic wand, it would be to figure out how to do that mixture
Mm.
better. But we are iterating, experimenting, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, everything is an iterative process, right? You're learning, evolving, and adapting. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think props to you and the team for that. So unfortunately, kind of bringing this discussion to a close, at least for today. But before we do go, what's a way for people to connect with you? And are there any kind of other resources that people can check out to learn more?
Well, there are definitely resources to learn more. Let me start there. If you go to the Trailblazer community group that I
Mhm.
mentioned, which is
Yeah.
called open source or salesforce.org commons and sprint events, that's the place to learn about the events and get involved, look at the different projects, think about what you might want to contribute to. The way to contribute is to just show up at sprints
Yeah.
or tell people you're interested, start coming to many of the projects meet, monthly virtually to just keep the project going. um, Connecting with me, I'm very easy to find. I'm very active in the Trailblazer community. I'm active on Ohana Slack. I have a blog called freelikeapuppy.tech where I write about Salesforce in the nonprofit context. You can also, of course, connect with me on LinkedIn or email me directly, michael@kolodner.com. I am very easy to find. But I will say, getting involved in the sprints will change your life. It's where I've met some of my very closest friends, both in the Salesforce community and in real life, including Emma and
Yeah.
others. Just spending a day or two together, working together on projects, working together to make the world better is a great way to connect with people.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's a really great point to kind of wrap things up on. So thanks for your time today. And hopefully we inspire some more people to learn about some of these amazing projects and get involved themselves. So thanks again.
Thanks, Tom. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Be More with Tom Bassett. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave any feedback in the comments.